I swear, some neighborhoods feel less like peaceful places to live and more like reality shows that nobody signed up for. Every morning, you step outside wondering what ridiculous drama is going to unfold next. In my case, that daily suspense had a name. Karen, our neighborhood's self-appointed queen of the HOA, ruler of perfectly aligned trash cans, and guardian of lawns that dared to grow half an inch too tall. Karen treated the HOA bylaws like they were sacred scripture. I'm not exaggerating. She once fined a neighbor because their mailbox leaned slightly to the left, like it was committing some kind of architectural crime. Another time, she walked around with a tape measure checking whether fences were exactly the approved height, as if the entire community might collapse if someone's wood panel stood 2 centimeters higher than the rest. Living near her meant every small decision felt like you were being watched by the world's most enthusiastic hall monitor. Want to park your car a little crooked? Expect a warning note. Forget to bring your trash can in before sunset? Congratulations, you're now a criminal in Karen's eyes. But as exhausting as all that was, none of us had any idea just how far Karen's obsession with control was about to go. Because one quiet morning, she tried to have me arrested for eating bacon. And somehow, that ridiculous moment spiraled into a disaster so spectacular that the entire neighborhood watched her destroy her own life in minutes. If you've ever met someone who treats tiny amounts of power like they've just been crowned emperor of the universe, then you already understand Karen. Being president of the HOA wasn't just a volunteer position to her. It was a full-time identity, a mission, a calling. She didn't just enforce the neighborhood rules, she worshipped them. Karen had this way of patrolling the streets like a security guard protecting national secrets instead of suburban sidewalks. I'm not kidding when I say she once walked up to my neighbor's yard with a ruler to check the grass height, not eyeballing it, not estimating. A literal ruler. When she announced the grass was 3/4 of an inch taller than the allowed limit, she handed him a fine slip, as she had just cracked a major criminal case. Trash cans were another obsession. According to Karen, they needed to be placed exactly 12 inches from the curb, facing a specific direction, and removed within a mysterious window of time that only she seemed to understand. If someone forgot and left their can out too long, Karen would magically appear the next morning with a warning notice already printed. Then there were the fences. One Saturday afternoon, she walked around the neighborhood carrying a tape measure, like a detective gathering evidence. She stopped at every fence post, checking heights and muttering to herself while writing things down on a clipboard. Watching her was like witnessing someone audit a prison yard instead of a quiet residential block. The crazy thing is, for the most part, people tolerated her. We rolled our eyes, paid the occasional fine, complained in the neighborhood Facebook group, and moved on. Everyone figured Karen was just one of those overly intense HOA leaders who liked feeling important. But that fragile balance was shattered during one HOA meeting that still feels surreal when I think about it. Karen walked in with a dramatic energy that immediately made everyone uncomfortable. She raised her hands like she was about to deliver a sermon and calmly announced that she had experienced a spiritual awakening. According to Karen, this transformation now gave her the authority to introduce moral lifestyle guidelines for the entire neighborhood. And that's when she dropped the rule that made everyone stare at her like she'd lost her mind. No pork, no alcohol, no bacon, anywhere in the neighborhood. At first, the room went completely silent. Not the comfortable kind of silence you get when people are thinking. The awkward kind. The kind where everyone is waiting for the punchline that never comes. Karen stood at the front of the HOA meeting room with this dramatic posture, hands raised slightly like she was delivering a sermon instead of a monthly neighborhood update. Her voice had that slow, serious tone people use when they want to sound important. She began explaining that she had recently experienced what she called a profound spiritual transformation. According to her, this awakening had opened her eyes to a higher responsibility, not just as HOA president, but as what she described as a moral guide for the community. I remember glancing around the room, expecting someone to laugh or at least ask if this was some kind of weird joke. Nobody did. Karen kept going, building up the moment like she was revealing life-changing news. She talked about purity, discipline, and the importance of living by stronger values. Then she calmly announced that, moving forward, the neighborhood would need to follow new lifestyle rules in order to maintain what she called a harmonious environment. That's when she dropped the actual rules. No pork products, no alcohol, no beer, no bacon, none of it is allowed anywhere within the neighborhood boundaries. For a few seconds, I honestly thought she was kidding. I mean, who walks into a suburban HOA meeting and tries to ban bacon like they're passing federal law? But Karen wasn't smiling. In fact, she looked incredibly serious. And then she did something that made it clear this wasn't some strange motivational speech. She reached into her folder and pulled out a stack of printed violation slips. Actual fines. She explained that anyone caught violating these new community standards would receive penalties just like any other HOA rule violation. The room filled with quiet murmurs, confused whispers bouncing from chair to chair. Some people looked stunned. Others looked irritated. A few looked like they were calculating how fast they could sell their house. I just leaned back in my chair, shaking my head. Respecting someone's personal beliefs is one thing. Being forced to follow them by a neighborhood committee is another. So I made a simple decision that night. I wasn't changing a single thing about my life. If I wanted to grill bacon on a Saturday afternoon or enjoy a cold beer on my porch after work, I was going to do it. Apparently, Karen noticed that decision faster than I expected, because the moment she saw me cooking bacon a few days later, her expression hardened like she had just discovered a personal enemy. And from that point forward, she treated me like I had officially declared war. The first fine arrived on a calm Friday evening while I was sitting on my porch enjoying the kind of peaceful moment that makes you forget the world can be ridiculous. The sun was setting, the air smelled like charcoal from the grill, and I had a cold beer resting on the small table beside me. In other words, a completely normal evening for a grown adult who just finished a long week of work. Then Karen appeared. She marched across the sidewalk like a woman on a mission, clipboard in one hand, printed papers flapping dramatically in the other. Before I could even greet her, she slammed a sheet of paper onto my table with enough force to make my bottle wobble. $70. That was the fine print in bold letters at the top. Violation. Possession of prohibited food items. I looked at the paper, then back at Karen, and honestly couldn't stop myself from laughing. Not a polite chuckle either. A full, confused laugh that made her face tighten as she'd just bitten into a lemon. "You think I'm paying this?" I asked. Karen folded her arms, clearly expecting intimidation to do the job. She started explaining that her new community guidelines were now official HOA standards, and that refusing to comply would only lead to more penalties. I told her there was absolutely no universe where I was paying $70 because she smelled bacon drifting across the street. That moment right there started what I can only describe as the fine war. Every few days, Karen seemed to magically appear whenever I used my grill. If bacon hit the pan, she wasn't far behind. Sometimes she'd stand across the street pretending to examine someone's bushes while scribbling notes on her clipboard. Other times, she'd walk right up to my porch like a parking officer hunting expired meters. Another violation slip, another dollar amount. Possession of restricted food, consumption of prohibited products, failure to respect community lifestyle rules. By the third fine, I stopped even reading them. I'd take the paper, glance at it for half a second, then set it down like it was junk mail. Once, I even used one to wipe barbecue sauce off my fingers while Karen watched in silent outrage. That might not have been the most mature decision, but the look on her face was worth it. The problem was that every ignored fine seemed to push her closer to a boiling point. Her tone changed. The lectures got longer. The clipboard started shaking slightly when she wrote things down. One afternoon, she leaned closer than usual, eyes narrowed, voice low and tense. "You're going to regret defying my authority," she said. Now, at the time, I honestly thought she was bluffing. People say dramatic things when they feel powerless, and Karen had just realized her stack of fake fines meant nothing to me. So I shrugged it off, cracked open another beer, and went back to grilling. What I didn't realize was that Karen wasn't done escalating, not even close, and the stunt she was planning next would turn our quiet street into a full-blown spectacle. A few mornings later, long before I'd had the chance to fully wake up, someone started pounding on my front door like they were trying to break it down. Not knocking. Pounding. The kind of aggressive, echoing thuds that instantly pull you out of sleep and make your brain jump straight to worst-case scenarios. For a split second, I thought maybe there had been an emergency in the neighborhood. Then I heard Karen's voice outside. Even through the door, I could recognize that sharp, dramatic tone she always used when she believed she was about to win some grand victory. I dragged myself out of bed, still half asleep, and opened the door expecting another lecture about bacon fumes drifting through the air. Instead, Karen was standing on my porch beside a police officer. Now that woke me up. Karen had her arms crossed, and this smug little smile on her face like someone who had finally caught a criminal mastermind. The officer, on the other hand, looked calm but slightly confused, like he had been given very little information about why he was there. The moment the door opened, Karen pointed directly at me with the energy of someone revealing the culprit in a courtroom drama. "Arrest him," she announced loudly. The officer blinked once, slowly, like he was giving his brain a second to process what he'd just heard. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "what exactly did he do?" Karen inhaled like she had been rehearsing this speech all morning. Her voice immediately took on that same dramatic authority she used at HOA meetings. "He repeatedly violates our community laws," she said, gesturing toward my porch like it was a crime scene. "He consumes pork products and drinks alcohol in public view despite clear restrictions established by the Homeowners Association." For a moment, the officer just stared at her. Then he glanced at me, then back at her. There was a brief pause that felt almost comical, like the entire situation had stalled while reality caught up with Karen's imagination. Finally, he cleared his throat and spoke in the calmest, most patient voice imaginable. "Ma'am, eating bacon is not illegal." Karen's expression tightened immediately. The officer continued, still polite but now slightly firmer. He explained that HOA rules could regulate things like property maintenance or parking, but they didn't give anyone the power to criminalize food choices. Drinking a beer on my own porch wasn't breaking any law, and neither was cooking pork. You could practically see the moment the explanation sank in. Karen's confident posture started to crack. The smug expression disappeared, replaced by something much less comfortable. Her cheeks flushed slightly, and the tight grip she had on her clipboard suggested she wasn't handling the embarrassment very well. But instead of backing down, she looked angrier. Much angrier. Her jaw clenched, her shoulders stiffened, and for a second, it looked like she was trying very hard to hold something back. The officer had already started to turn slightly, clearly preparing to end the conversation and move on with his day. That's when Karen suddenly took a step forward, and the look on her face made it painfully clear that this situation was about to get much worse. For a moment, it looked like the whole situation was about to end quietly. The officer had already begun turning away from my porch, clearly ready to chalk the entire thing up as a misunderstanding and move on with his day. I remember thinking that maybe Karen would finally realize how ridiculous the situation had become and just walk back to her house. She did start walking away. 2 slow steps down the path, then something in her snapped. Karen spun around so fast it caught everyone off guard. Her face had completely changed. The embarrassment from a few seconds earlier now replaced with pure, explosive anger. Before the officer could even react, she stormed back toward him, shouting loud enough for half the street to hear. "This is religious persecution," she screamed. And then, unbelievably, she swung at him. It wasn't some accidental bump or dramatic gesture. Karen actually tried to slap the back of the officer's neck like she was punishing him for disobedience. The whole thing happened so quickly that for a split second, my brain struggled to process what I was seeing. The officer, to his credit, reacted instantly. He stepped back, grabbed her arm mid-lunge, and turned her around with calm efficiency that made it clear he'd handled situations like this before. Karen immediately started thrashing and shouting, her voice climbing higher with every second as she accused him of harassment, corruption, and oppression all at once. By then, the noise had drawn attention from across the street. Doors opened. Curtains moved. A couple of neighbors stepped outside, phones already raised because, let's be honest, moments like this spread through a neighborhood faster than wildfire. Within seconds, several people were filming as Karen continued yelling while the officer secured handcuffs around her wrists. The entire scene felt surreal. Just minutes earlier, she had been demanding someone else's arrest. Now she was the one being escorted across the yard toward the patrol car, still shouting protests while the officer calmly guided her into the back seat. And as the car door shut, the reality of what had just happened began spreading through the neighborhood like electricity. The moment the patrol car pulled away, the entire street felt like it had just witnessed the finale of the strangest show imaginable. Neighbors who had been watching from their porches slowly started talking to each other, replaying what they had just seen, like people leaving a movie theater after an unbelievable plot twist. Phones were still out. Messages were already flying to the neighborhood group chat, and within an hour, the story had spread to nearly everyone on the block. But the real consequences started rolling in over the next few days. Karen didn't just get a warning or a slap on the wrist. According to the police report, the situation had crossed several lines that couldn't simply be ignored. Attempting to strike a police officer immediately triggered an assault charge. Calling the police with a completely fabricated complaint added a false report charge on top of that. And the scene she created in the middle of the street, screaming loud enough to wake half the neighborhood, earned her a disturbing the peace violation as well. Suddenly, those little slips of paper she loved handing out so much looked pretty insignificant compared to the stack of legal paperwork now headed her way. The HOA board didn't waste much time either. Within days, they held an emergency meeting and voted to remove her from the presidency. Not only that, but they added a permanent ban preventing her from ever holding an HOA leadership position again. And just like that, the woman who once patrolled the streets measuring fences and writing fines disappeared from her throne of neighborhood authority. The streets got quieter. The tension vanished. People actually started grilling again without checking over their shoulders. And Karen? She became the story everyone told whenever someone started taking HOA rules a little too seriously. Even now, whenever I grill bacon on the porch, I can't help but think about how that whole mess unfolded. One person's obsession with control turned a quiet neighborhood into a full-blown spectacle and somehow ended with her riding away in a patrol car instead of writing another fine. But I'm curious about something. If you had been in my place, what would you have done? Would you have ignored the rules like I did, or tried to keep the peace? Let me know in the comments. And if you've ever had a neighbor story this crazy, I'd love to hear it. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because trust me, this neighborhood isn't done surprising us yet.